The sound of their laughter echoes in the grand dining room as I stand at the threshold, my hands tucked into the worn sleeves of my coat. Still, I remain quiet, just a forgotten old man in their world of wealth. My daughter, Ava, shifts beside me, caught between loyalty and regret. As they dismiss me with every glance, I let them, until I reveal what they've been too blind to see. While they think I'm just a broke old man, they're about to learn the truth about who I am and what I've been protecting for her. It's time for my son-in-law to face the consequences. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Ava's voice trembled slightly as she sat across from her father at the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the window. Dad, the Reeves family, they want us to come to their place for a formal introduction dinner. Sam looked up from his cup of coffee, his hands steady as ever, despite the quiet unease in the room. His eyes, sharp yet soft, met Ava's. He didn't need to ask the obvious, but he did anyway, his tone casual. Formal. What exactly does that mean? Ava hesitated, the words clearly weighing on her. She let out a breath, gathering herself before speaking again. Colton's family, they're wealthy, Dad. I just don't want them to think... She faltered, searching for the right words. They judge a lot. You know how they are. They might not understand our life, how things have been for us. Sam nodded slowly, absorbing the undercurrent of worry in her voice. He could see it, the anxiety that Ava was already anticipating the judgment, the disapproval that would surely come when they saw him. He didn't need to ask who she was really worried about. Colton's father, Roger, the real estate mogul who valued status and appearances above all else. Beth, Colton's mother, with her passive-aggressive smiles and unspoken judgments. And Colton, Ava's husband, who wore charm like a mask, but Sam knew the truth beneath it. I'm not a fan of pretenses, Sam said, his voice soft but firm. His gaze drifted to the window, the mountains in the distance still and serene, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing in his daughter's heart. But if this is important to you, I'll go. Ava's lips parted as if to protest, but Sam raised a hand, silencing her. No need to apologize. I know how these things work. He studied her, seeing the fine lines of stress around her eyes. It wasn't just the dinner she was worried about. It was what this dinner represented. A kind of unspoken test. A chance for her to prove herself, to prove that she had married well, that she had risen from their modest beginnings. She looked down, twisting her fingers together. I just want to make a good impression, Dad. I want them to accept us. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And I don't want you to be embarrassed. Sam's heart ached at her words. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be fine, that this dinner was nothing but a trivial moment in the grand scheme of things. But he knew better. There was no easy fix, no simple way to change how people saw them, especially people like the Reeves family. He exhaled slowly, then looked at her with a softness that only he could convey. I'm not embarrassed, Ava. Not by anything. He paused, watching her face carefully, as if trying to gauge her thoughts. You're my daughter. That's all that matters to me. Ava gave him a weak smile, but the worry didn't leave her eyes. Sam understood. He had been where she was now, a daughter, always striving to meet the impossible standards set by her husband's family, by the world. But this was different. The world they were about to step into was one Sam knew well in a way. His music had brought him into circles like these, but never with the pretense that Colton's family wore so effortlessly. Sam remained silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of his coffee cup. Ava's words lingered in the air, but he wasn't ready to speak yet. Finally, he stood and walked to the coat rack by the door, his movements slow and deliberate. I think I'll wear my old coat, he said with a half smile, his voice matter-of-fact. Ava's eyebrows furrowed. Dad, you don't have to... No, he interrupted gently, a glimmer of something playful in his eyes. I think it's time they meet a quiet old man. Let's see how they treat me. Ava bit her lip, her anxiety still thick in the air. Are you sure about this? Sam's face softened as he met her gaze. I've lived long enough to know that sometimes the truth is in how people react when they think they've got you figured out. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly in thought. And maybe, just maybe, I'll get a clearer picture of who they really are. Ava swallowed hard, but Sam could see the smallest shift in her posture, something between acceptance and relief. She nodded slowly, though a thread of concern still lingered in her expression. Okay, Dad, she said, though her voice was still unsure. But please, just be careful. Sam smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. I've been careful my whole life, sweetheart. Maybe it's time to let them make the first move. As he turned toward the door, Ava's gaze followed him, still anxious, but with a hint of curiosity now. She wasn't sure what to expect from this dinner, but she knew one thing. Sam wasn't like any man Colton's family had ever met, and that alone made her wonder what kind of storm was about to unfold. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Ava alone with her thoughts. The drive up to the Reeves cabin was long, the winding roads hugging the mountain edges, offering glimpses of the valley below. Sam didn't mind the silence in the car. Ava had barely said a word since they left the house, her fingers gripping the steering wheel too tightly, her eyes flickering to the rearview mirror as if hoping to catch some trace of her own reflection, anything that could steady her nerves. When they finally arrived, the cabin stood imposingly against the fading light of the evening, the glow of chandeliers visible through the tall windows. It was exactly what Sam had expected, cold, polished, and artificial. The kind of place built for showing off wealth rather than offering comfort. Ava turned to him before they got out of the car. Dad, please, just try to make a good impression. For me. Sam smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd known what was coming. He'd known the kind of people the Reeves were, but he wasn't about to let them dictate how he'd feel or act. I'm just a quiet old man, Ava, he said gently, nothing to impress. She didn't respond, just pushed open the door, the cold mountain air rushing in as they made their way up the steps. As Sam stepped over the threshold, he could already feel the tension in the air, thick like the fine dust of money and status that clung to everything in this place. Beth Reeves was the first to greet them, her eyes scanning Sam from head to toe, her smile cold, but perfectly placed. She extended her hand, her grip firm, but far too rehearsed. It's so nice to finally meet you, Samuel. We've heard so much about you. Sam shook her hand slowly, his worn coat brushing against the edges of the glossy hardwood floors as he adjusted his stance. He noticed her eyes flicker for just a moment, a silent judgment passing over her face. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by the kind of polite smile that felt like a mask. She was sizing him up, just as she had with Ava. Behind her stood Roger, Colton's father, a tall man with graying hair and an air of superiority that didn't need to be spoken. He gave Sam a cursory glance before offering his hand. It was stiff, lacking warmth, as though Sam were nothing more than an inconvenient formality. So, Roger said, his voice clipped, you're retired. Sam met his eyes directly, his own voice quiet but unyielding. That's right. Roger's eyebrows raised slightly, as if Sam had just confirmed some unspoken suspicion. Must be nice to have that kind of free time, he remarked dryly. Colton appeared next, his charming smile wide and welcoming, but Sam could see right through it. He gave a brief, almost dismissive nod to his father before turning to Sam. You know, he said, his tone light, my wife's father lives on a tiny pension. I bet it's not a whole lot, huh? Ava flinched at the remark, her face reddening slightly, but she said nothing. Sam saw it, the little cracks in the facade, the way Colton's casual words stabbed at her dignity without her even realizing it. But Sam wasn't here to fight for Colton's approval. He wasn't here to please anyone. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He simply nodded slowly. I make do. The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. The family, in their pristine clothes and perfect lives, all assumed they had him pegged. And Sam, in his worn shoes and old coat, let them. There was no need to correct them. Let them think what they wanted. Let them believe their version of the truth. Sam was patient, and in time, they would learn. Ava was quiet now, her eyes flickering between her husband and her father, the discomfort radiating off her like a silent storm. She avoided making eye contact with her father as they made their way into the dining room, but Sam saw the tightness in her jaw, the way she kept her posture rigid, as if bracing for an impact that hadn't yet come. Beth led them to the table, and Sam noticed her careful placement of the chairs. She didn't want any surprises, any missteps in the carefully constructed world she had built. Every movement was deliberate, every word weighed. Sam didn't take offense. People like her had their rules. He didn't need to play by them, but he understood them all the same. As they sat down, Roger took his seat at the head of the table, his presence commanding. "So," he began, the conversation veering into polite, almost disinterested chatter. "Ava tells us you've got a real appreciation for music, Samuel. That's nice. I imagine that must keep you busy in retirement?" Sam took his time with the answer, savoring the moment. "I enjoy the quiet, but music never really leaves you." Colton's eyes glinted with a mix of mockery and amusement, and Sam caught it instantly. "Yeah," Colton said with a laugh. "I guess you're not doing much on stage anymore, huh?" Sam said nothing, just let the comment linger in the air. He didn't need to prove anything to them. Ava's eyes flickered toward him, but she didn't speak. Her discomfort growing. She knew. She could feel the layers of judgment building, even if they didn't say it outright. But Sam wasn't about to let her take the blame for this. She had done nothing wrong. He wasn't angry. No, Sam wasn't angry. He was just letting them show their true colors, one carefully placed word at a time. He let the tension simmer, knowing exactly how long it would take before they realized they had underestimated him. And as the evening wore on, he couldn't help but wonder, how long would it take before they realized just how wrong they were? The candlelight flickered on the table, casting long shadows over the polished surface of the dinner spread. The elegant china and crystal glasses gleamed, but the warmth of the evening was quickly overshadowed by an undercurrent of tension that Sam could feel as clearly as he could feel the weight of his old coat. He sat at the far end of the table, the low hum of conversation swirling around him like a distant murmur. He took a slow bite of his food, the quiet rhythm of chewing the only thing that anchored him in a room full of uncomfortable silence. Roger, at the head of the table, was the loudest voice, and as always, it was one that demanded attention. He leaned forward, his hands steepled together, as though preparing to deliver some grand insight into the world. "You know," he said, the sound of his voice cutting through the room, "there's something to be said about a man's ability to provide. The kind of man who ensures his daughter's future is secure, no matter what." Sam barely glanced up from his plate, but he could feel Ava's discomfort. Her eyes darted nervously to her husband, but Colton seemed entirely engrossed in his glass of wine, his smug smile barely visible beneath the candlelight. Sam didn't need to look at him to know that Colton was enjoying every moment of this, every word Roger spoke. Sam swallowed slowly, maintaining his calm. He wasn't going to rise to the bait. Not now, not ever. Beth, sitting next to Roger, shifted in her seat, her voice laced with an almost deliberate sweetness. "Ava's certainly upgraded, marrying into our family," she said, her tone airy but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Sam could feel the weight of her words settle on the room, heavy with judgment. The comment was subtle enough to be overlooked by anyone who wasn't paying close attention, but Sam wasn't like the others. He'd spent years in the spotlight, seen and heard the cruel whispers behind closed doors. He knew what Beth was doing, and it wasn't lost on him that she was trying to make a statement, one that suggested Ava had settled, that she had chosen a life of luxury over something more meaningful. Ava shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands clenching under the table. Sam noticed her jaw tighten, the way her eyes glazed over for a moment, as though the words had struck deeper than anyone realized. She hadn't wanted this. She didn't want to be here, among these people who saw her marriage as some sort of transaction. And as much as she tried to hide it, Sam could see the hurt in her eyes. He wanted to reach out to her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, that none of this was her doing. But he knew the moment wasn't his to intervene. Not yet. Colton's voice broke the stillness, a laugh, just a little too loud, a little too mocking. Yeah, he added with a grin that made Sam's blood run cold. Her dad's not exactly a role model. I mean, he's retired, right? What does he really have to show for all that time? A ripple of laughter followed, coming from Roger and Beth. They didn't even bother to hide their amusement, though it was clear in the way their smiles faltered for just a fraction of a second. Sam kept his gaze on his plate, the sharp taste of bitterness rising in his throat. But he didn't react. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, he ate slowly, deliberately, letting the food fill the silence. He could hear Ava's breath catch beside him. But she remained silent, her eyes focused on the table in front of her. Sam could sense her shame, the weight of her husband's words, and her parents' disapproval pressing down on her. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that she had nothing to be ashamed of. But he knew better than to speak now. In this moment, he had to show restraint. Beth glanced at Colton, then back at Sam, a smile curling at the corner of her lips. It was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile meant to belittle him without him ever knowing it. "Well," she said, the words dripping with an unsettling sweetness, "we can't all be, high-value men. Some of us are content with what we have." Ava's hands clenched tightly under the table, but she didn't speak, her gaze now fixed firmly on her plate. Sam's heart ached for her, but he couldn't let it show. He could feel the weight of her shame, like an invisible cloak draped over her shoulders. And he knew it wasn't just the dinner that was making her feel small. It was the life she had married into, the life that seemed to mock everything she had ever known, everything she had ever been. The conversation shifted again, but Sam barely registered the words. He could feel his mind sharpen, every part of him attuned to the small, subtle details that the others missed. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Colton, his son-in-law, reaching down near his chair to pull out a small folder from under the table. He slid it across the seat, his fingers brushing the edge of the folder as he tucked it close to him. Sam's gaze lingered on it for just a moment too long. His curiosity piqued. The folder was small, unmarked, but it looked important. Sam knew it wasn't just paperwork. It was something else, something Colton didn't want anyone to see. A small thrill of realization shot through Sam, but he didn't let it show. He'd been in rooms like this before, dealing with people who tried to play games, who thought they could pull strings and get away with it. Sam had learned long ago to play his hand, close to his chest. And as Colton casually placed the folder back under his chair, Sam made a mental note. What was it? And why was it so important that Colton felt the need to hide it? Sam's gaze flicked briefly to Ava, her face still flushed with humiliation. And for a moment, just a moment, he wondered what he would have to do to protect her from this. The dinner had dragged on longer than Sam had anticipated. The fake smiles, the thinly veiled insults, the subtle tension that only seemed to grow as the evening progressed. It was all wearing him down. Ava had barely said a word since their exchange with Colton and his parents. She seemed lost, her mind elsewhere, her eyes never fully meeting his. He could feel her anxiety growing with each passing moment, but he knew the evening wasn't over. Not yet. As the last of the wine was poured, Colton stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Hey, Sam," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mind stepping outside with me for a minute? I'd like to have a quick chat." Sam raised an eyebrow, but he didn't hesitate. He'd been waiting for this, for the moment when Colton would reveal his true intentions. He stood slowly, placing his napkin on the table, giving Ava a brief glance. She looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable, before turning her gaze back to her plate. She was on the edge of something. He could feel it, but this was his moment, not hers. They walked in silence through the house, the soft hum of conversation from the dining room fading as they stepped onto the porch. The cool night air hit Sam's face like a slap, but he didn't mind. It was a welcome change from the stifling atmosphere inside. Colton leaned against the railing, his posture casual, as if this was just another business deal. He gestured for Sam to join him. "So," Colton began, his tone smooth and confident, "I've been thinking about something. With all the changes happening in the family lately, I think it's time we took a bigger step, a more serious step." Sam listened, his arms crossed, his expression neutral. He had an idea of where this was going, but he didn't rush to interrupt. Let Colton talk. Let him think he had control over the situation. "I've got this Mountain Lodge project," Colton continued, his voice oozing with self-assurance. "It's going to be huge, massive, a big investment, but here's the thing. I need a co-signer for the loan, someone with some weight, someone with a little more credibility than a guy like me." Sam's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly where this was heading, but he stayed silent, watching Colton closely, measuring his words. "I was thinking," Colton went on, a smug smile creeping onto his face. "You've got a little money saved up. Your daughter, Ava, she needs security, right? I mean, she married me, but she doesn't have the financial cushion to fall back on if things go sideways. A little help from you wouldn't hurt. All I need is your name on the dotted line. No money involved, just your signature." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. Sam's mind raced, but his face remained calm, unmoving. He could feel the weight of the offer, the manipulative undertones of Colton's words. This wasn't a favor. This wasn't about helping Ava. This was a calculated move, a way for Colton to leverage Sam's name, his status, for his own benefit. Roger's voice drifted from inside, carrying through the open window. "Just sign, Sam," he called out, his tone as dismissive as ever. "No one's asking you for money, just your name." Sam could feel the anger rising, but he buried it deep. This wasn't the time to let emotions take over. He had to stay calm. He had to play his cards, carefully. "So, you want me to co-sign on this project?" Sam finally spoke, his voice low, measured. "For a man who couldn't even offer me the respect of a proper handshake?" Colton chuckled, a hollow sound, as though he'd heard this before. "It's business, Sam, nothing personal. Just a way for you to help secure Ava's future. You have nothing to lose." Sam leaned in slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "You don't know anything about me, Colton. You think I'm some old man who doesn't know how to make a deal? You think I have nothing left to lose?" Colton's smile faltered for just a moment, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Exactly," he said, his tone patronizing. "You've got nothing left, Sam. That's the beauty of it. You've already retired. You've already seen the end of the road. All you're doing is helping your daughter. Helping her secure a future that doesn't involve worrying about your finances." Sam didn't respond immediately. He stood there, looking out over the mountains, letting the quiet linger between them. He could feel the weight of Colton's expectations, the thinly veiled threat hanging in the air. But more than that, he could see the full picture now. This wasn't about helping Ava. This was about Colton trying to manipulate him, trying to use him as a pawn in some bigger game that Sam wasn't ready to play. Finally, Sam turned to Colton, his face unreadable. "I don't do business with men like you," he said softly. Colton's smile twisted into something colder, more calculated. "Well, then you'll have to explain that to Ava. I'm sure she'll understand. After all, she's the one who will suffer if this deal falls through." Sam's jaw clenched. He'd expected this, the guilt trip, the subtle manipulation, but now he saw it for what it truly was, a power play, nothing more. Colton was trying to leverage his daughter, trying to pull the strings from behind the scenes. As Sam stood there, the weight of the moment settling over him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Colton had shown his hand, but there were still too many cards left to be played. Sam had a decision to make, but the choices weren't as simple as they appeared. The car moved along the winding mountain roads, the headlights illuminating patches of the dark, towering trees on either side. The night was heavy, thick with unspoken words. Sam stared out of the window, watching the scenery blur by, the sound of the engine humming softly in the background. Ava hadn't said a word since they left the cabin. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale against the darkness. Sam could feel her tension, her shame, radiating from the seat beside him. But he didn't know how to ease it. The dinner, the words they'd exchanged, the way Colton's family had looked at him, it all felt suffocating. Sam didn't know what hurt more, the condescension, the subtle mockery, or seeing his daughter shrink under the weight of it all. He wasn't angry. He had long stopped letting other people's opinions dictate his mood. No, this felt different. It was a quiet kind of disappointment, the kind that wrapped itself around your chest like a cold hand, squeezing just enough to make you ache, but not enough to break you. Ava finally broke the silence, her voice soft, almost like a whisper. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, her words heavy with guilt. "I didn't know it would be like that. I thought—" She paused, her voice faltering, as if she wasn't sure what she thought anymore. "I thought maybe they'd be different." Sam didn't respond immediately, letting her words settle in the quiet of the car. He could feel the weight of her apology, but more than that, he could feel the layers beneath it. The helplessness, the hurt, the way she had tried so hard to make everything fit into a neat box, only to watch it crumble in front of her. He knew she hadn't wanted this, none of it. She hadn't wanted to feel torn between the family she was born into and the one she married into. Sam understood that more than she realized. He turned his head slightly, glancing at her profile. "You don't need to apologize, Ava," he said, his voice calm, steady. "I'm not angry, just disappointed." Ava's grip on the wheel tightened, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for something else, something more. "I know, I don't want them to think you're a burden. I don't want them to look at us like we're some kind of charity case. It's just hard, Dad. Colton, She trailed off, her words hanging in the air like an unfinished thought. Sam knew the rest of it, even without her saying it. He had seen the way Colton treated her, the way he pulled the strings of her life, managing everything from her social circle to, as he would soon find out, her finances. The pieces were starting to come together. He could see it now. Ava wasn't just struggling with Colton's family, she was struggling with Colton himself. She glanced at him quickly before returning her gaze to the road. "Colton handles all my finances now," she said, her voice almost a confession. "Everything. Bills, savings, everything. I don't even know where the money's coming from half the time. It's just easier that way." Sam's chest tightened as the words sank in. A part of him had always suspected it, but hearing it from her lips confirmed something darker. Colton wasn't just controlling their lives on a superficial level. He was controlling everything, pulling every string, making sure Ava had no independence of her own. It wasn't love, it was manipulation. It was control. And now, Sam was beginning to realize just how far Colton's reach extended. For a moment, the silence between them was thick, suffocating. Sam's mind raced. He wanted to say something, anything that would make it right. But words felt hollow in the face of what was really going on. He wasn't just disappointed in Colton or his family anymore. He was afraid for Ava. He hadn't realized how deep the hold was, how long this had been festering. The car turned onto the familiar road that led to Sam's home. He knew this house well. It was where he had raised Ava, where he had built a life with Janelle. It was home, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place that was holding onto ghosts, remnants of a past that he couldn't escape, even if he tried. When they pulled into the driveway, Ava put the car in park but didn't move. She kept her eyes on the steering wheel, her hands still gripping it tightly. Sam didn't wait. He opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. He could feel the heaviness of everything, the weight of what he knew, what he had just learned about his daughter's marriage, and what he had to do now. Inside, Sam moved quietly through the dark house, the silence following him like a shadow. He went to his old safe in the corner of the study, a relic of his past that he hadn't opened in years. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed the combination, but he didn't hesitate. The heavy door swung open with a soft click, revealing the stack of papers hidden inside. Ava had never known about this safe. She didn't know about the documents, the bank statements, the royalties he had kept tucked away all these years. Sam had kept it from her, not because he didn't trust her, but because he wanted her to have her independence, to stand on her own 2 feet without feeling like she was dependent on his wealth. But now, as he flipped through the papers, his mind already working on the next move, Sam knew he couldn't hide it any longer. The documents were a silent reminder of who he was, of what he had built over the years, but they were also a weapon that he would use to make sure Ava never felt controlled again. As Sam closed the safe, the weight of the decision settled over him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The house was quiet, too quiet. Sam stood in the middle of the study, the faint light from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The old safe, tucked away in the corner, was something he hadn't opened in years. It had always been there, a relic of the past, a silent reminder of a time when the music came first, when he lived for the sound, the rhythm, the stage. But now it held something more, something that had been buried, tucked away from the world, from Ava. He hadn't wanted her to know. With slow, deliberate movements, Sam knelt down in front of the safe. His hands, though aged, still carried the steady precision of years spent handling instruments and fragile contracts. He turned the dial, the familiar click and hum echoing through the quiet room. When the door finally swung open, it revealed the contents he had kept hidden for so long. The first thing Sam pulled out was a thick stack of royalty checks, their edges worn, but the numbers still clear. Decades of music work, the fruits of a life lived in the jazz world, were now neatly filed away, just out of sight. He had kept it from Ava, had kept it from everyone, because he had wanted her to find her own way, to build a life independent of him. The thought of her relying on his wealth, on anything he had accumulated over the years, had always made him uneasy. She deserved more than that. She deserved to stand on her own. But as Sam sifted through the papers, the weight of what he had been hiding pressed down on him. The royalty checks, the years of hard work, the legacy of a life spent in music. Everything was here. And so was the truth. He was worth millions, more than Colton or his family could have ever imagined. He let the stack of checks fall back into the safe and reached for the next document. It was a contract, the copyright rights to a famous jazz piece he had written years ago, one that had been used in commercials, the kind of lucrative deal that only the biggest names in the industry got. Sam had always been careful with his money, not flashy, not boastful. But now, staring at the contract, he realized how much control he had really kept hidden. He had never needed to explain it to Ava, because he didn't want her to feel any pressure, any weight from the life he had lived. But now, in the quiet of the room, as the truth of it all settled around him, he understood. Ava needed to know. The sharp ring of his phone shattered the stillness of the room. Sam picked it up without hesitation. It was Marcus, his old friend, his attorney. The one person who had always understood the music world, the business side of it, the deals that were made behind closed doors. "You okay?" Marcus's voice crackled through the line, calm and steady as always. "Need help?" Sam leaned back in his chair, staring at the safe and the piles of documents in front of him. The weight of it all felt different now. It wasn't just about the money or the business. It was about Ava, about Colton, and the manipulation that had been happening right under his nose. He exhaled slowly, trying to organize his thoughts. "I had dinner with Colton's family tonight," Sam began, his voice low, steady. "They tried to play me. They want me to co-sign a loan for some mountain lodge project. They think I'm broke, that I have nothing left to lose." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Marcus's laugh broke the silence. It wasn't a soft chuckle. It was a full belly laugh, the kind that made Sam feel both surprised and vindicated at the same time. "They think you're broke?" Marcus repeated, still chuckling. "Sam, that's rich. Let's use that. Let's use their mistake. You've got leverage. They don't even know the half of it." Sam's mind raced, the idea taking root in his thoughts. He hadn't thought of it that way before. He'd been so focused on protecting Ava from the truth, from the idea that she might feel beholden to his wealth, that he hadn't considered how he could turn this around. "They underestimate me," Sam murmured, almost to himself. "They've been treating me like some old man with nothing to offer, but they don't know who they're dealing with." Marcus's voice came through the phone, sharp and clear now. "Exactly. And if they're going to play that game, we'll play it better. Use that leverage, Sam. Let them think you've got nothing. Let them underestimate you. But when the time comes, you make them regret it. Make them regret ever trying to pull this stunt." Sam sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. A quiet resolve settled over him. The anger, the frustration, everything he'd been holding in began to burn away, replaced by something sharper, more purposeful. Colton and his family had played their cards, thinking they knew everything about him. But Sam had always been a player in his own right. and now it was time to show them that. As the conversation ended and Sam hung up the phone, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He had a plan, and this time, it wouldn't be his name that was used to pull strings. It would be their mistake. But even as the plan began to take shape, Sam knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Colton had made a dangerous miscalculation, and Sam was ready to make him pay. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet of the afternoon. Ava's eyes flicked toward the door, a heavy sense of dread creeping up her spine. She wasn't expecting anyone, not today at least, not with everything still so raw from the dinner the night before. But she had no choice. She had to face this. She had to face him. When she opened the door, Colton stood there, holding a large envelope, the edges of the paper crisp, almost too neat. His smile was wide, that polished smile that always seemed just a little too rehearsed, as though it had been practiced in front of a mirror too many times to feel real. "Hey, Ava," he said casually, his voice smooth as butter. "I've got the papers for your dad to sign. It's all here, nothing complicated." Ava took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she glanced at him. His posture was too relaxed, too confident. It irritated her in a way she couldn't explain. She could feel it, that faint unease that had been gnawing at her since the dinner. Something wasn't right. She wanted to say something, ask him what he was playing at, but her words stalled in her throat. "Colton," she started, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling inside. "Why us? Why does my dad need to sign this? What's really going on here?" Colton's smile didn't falter. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice dropping into that fake, comforting tone he always used when he wanted to downplay something important. "It's simple, babe. It's business," he said, his eyes flicking to the envelope in her hands before meeting hers again. "Your dad owes you. I'm just helping him fulfill that debt. I'm doing what's best for you, for us." Ava blinked, her stomach tightening as the words hit her. "Owes me," she repeated, a mix of confusion and disbelief in her voice. "What do you mean by that?" Colton took a breath, his face a mask of patience now. "It's not complicated, Ava. You know how it is. Families help each other out. He's not going to let his daughter fall behind, right? I'm just giving him the chance to show you that." His tone was smooth, but there was something behind his words, a sharp edge that she couldn't ignore. "You don't get it, do you?" Ava whispered, the realization slowly dawning on her. "This is about control, not about helping." Colton's expression faltered for a split second, just long enough for Ava to catch the shift in his demeanor, but then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the same charming smile. "I'm not controlling anything, Ava. I'm giving you stability. The future's unpredictable, but this," he gestured to the envelope, "this is security, for both of us." Ava wanted to throw the papers back in his face, to tell him she wasn't stupid, that she saw through the act, that she wasn't some pawn in his game. But she couldn't. Not yet. She was still piecing things together in her mind, still trying to make sense of the strings he was pulling. "Just have him sign it, okay? We need to move quickly. I'm counting on you." Colton's tone had shifted, a little colder now, a little more demanding. He wasn't asking anymore. He was telling her. Ava stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the envelope. She wanted to slam it in his face, tell him she didn't need his help, that she didn't need any of this. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. The reality of the situation was more complicated than that. "I'll talk to him," she said finally, her voice tight. She didn't want to invite him in, didn't want to let him into their home any longer than necessary, but she stepped aside anyway. Colton walked past her, his presence filling the space with that unnerving ease, as if he belonged there, as if he owned everything. "I'll be waiting for your call," Colton said, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer than necessary. There was no warmth in them, no affection, just calculation, as though everything had been mapped out, as though every move had been planned in advance. Ava watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him with an unsettling finality. She stood there for a moment, staring at the envelope in her hands. Sam, unbeknownst to her, had been standing just outside the hallway, listening to every word. He had heard it all, the smooth words, the lies wrapped in the guise of care. His anger simmered beneath the surface, but he kept it in check. He had heard enough. As Ava turned, her eyes still fixed on the papers, Sam stepped into the living room. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't have to. He knew what she was thinking. He could see it in the way her shoulders were tense, in the way her fingers clutched the envelope, as though she was afraid to open it. "Don't sign it," Sam said quietly, his voice low but resolute. Ava looked at him, startled. "But we need the money. He said it's the only way we can move forward." Sam didn't respond right away. He walked slowly over to where she was standing, taking the envelope from her hands, his fingers brushing hers just briefly. "This isn't about money, Ava," he said, his voice steady now. "This is about him trying to take everything from you. From us. He wants control." Ava opened her mouth to protest, but Sam silenced her with a gentle shake of his head. He took the unsigned forms, folded them carefully, and tucked them into his pocket. "I know exactly how to flip this situation," he said, a quiet determination in his tone. But Ava, still reeling from the conversation, didn't understand yet. She was too close to it all, too caught in the web Colton had spun. Sam couldn't blame her. He'd let her live in ignorance, protect her from this for so long, but the time for that was over. He had to act, and this time, there was no going back. The light from the desk lamp flickered in the otherwise dim room, casting long shadows across the pages spread out in front of Sam. He had always been methodical, careful with his time, especially when it came to matters of business. He knew this game well. He had lived in the world of contracts and negotiations for years, had signed deals and made moves that could make or break people's lives. But this felt different. This was personal. And Colton was about to find out that when you crossed Sam Hargrove, you didn't just make a mistake. You sealed your fate. Marcus sat across from him, his brow furrowed as he flipped through a stack of papers. The two of them had spent hours going over the documents Colton had provided, the ones he expected Sam to sign without question. The loan papers were clearly one-sided, designed to trap Sam, to make him an unwilling player in a game he hadn't agreed to. But that wasn't the only thing Marcus was uncovering. Marcus sat back in his chair, tapping a pen against the table. "You won't believe this, Sam," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Colton's deep in debt. The Lodge project? It's not a dream. It's a lifeline. If this loan doesn't go through, he's done for." Sam didn't flinch. He had suspected as much. Colton had always carried himself with the arrogance of someone who believed he could get away with anything. But this was more than a mere money grab. Colton wasn't just trying to expand his wealth, he was trying to stay afloat. The Lodge project wasn't an opportunity, it was a sinking ship. "Roger's company is in trouble too," Marcus continued, scanning through more papers on the desk. "They've got debts piling up, and this loan is literally their only way out. They're banking on you to sign, Sam. They need your name on that paper to keep their whole operation from collapsing." Sam's jaw tightened. So that was it. This wasn't about helping Ava. This wasn't about security or the future. It was about saving their own skins. Colton had used his charm, his polished smile, to pull Ava into this web, to make her believe that signing those papers was the right thing to do. But it wasn't. It was a desperate move, one that showed just how far Colton would go to maintain his facade of control. "They're drowning," Marcus muttered with a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "And they think they can use you to bail them out." Sam's lips tightened into a thin line. The anger he'd kept at bay was now boiling just beneath the surface. He had tried to be patient, to let Ava navigate her own way through this mess. But this was something else. This wasn't just about money. This was manipulation at its finest. Sam sat back in his chair, his hands folding calmly in front of him. "So, they looked for an old man as a float," he said quietly, his voice tinged with a cold finality. "They thought I'd be an easy mark, someone with nothing left to lose." Marcus looked up at him, his expression softening, as he saw the shift in Sam's demeanor. He had known Sam for years, knew how carefully he navigated the world, how much he'd sacrificed to keep his life simple, to keep his daughter safe from the darkness of the business world. But now, Sam was seeing through the smoke and mirrors, and it wasn't pretty. "They've made a grave mistake," Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. You've got leverage, Sam. You've got something they don't even realize. Sam didn't respond right away. His mind was racing now, piecing everything together. He had known Colton was playing a game, but he hadn't realized how deep the deception ran. This wasn't just about a loan. It was about power, control, and a desperate attempt to stay above water. Colton and Roger had underestimated him, thinking they could use his name to bail them out without any consequences. But Sam wasn't a man who played by their rules. I'm going to gather more evidence, Sam said, his voice quiet, determined. I'll get everything I need to expose them. Marcus nodded. I'll help however I can. But Sam, you know this isn't going to be easy. They won't go down without a fight. Sam met his gaze, his expression unshaken. I don't expect it to be easy, but they made a choice, and now it's time they pay for it. As the two of them continued to sift through the documents, each discovery only deepened Sam's resolve. He knew Colton was hiding things, spinning a story to make everything seem like it was in their favor. But Sam wasn't fooled. He was building something, his counterattack, his way of turning the tables, and Colton would never see it coming. As the hours wore on, the walls of the study felt smaller, the air thicker with anticipation. Sam could feel the weight of the decisions ahead of him. He wasn't just protecting his daughter anymore. He was protecting everything he had built, everything he had worked for, and when the time came, he would make sure Colton and his family would understand just how wrong they were to think they could use him. But even as he prepared his next move, one thought lingered in his mind. How far would Colton go to keep his lies intact? The answer was coming, and it would be delivered on Sam's terms. The drive to the Reeves' cabin felt different this time. The air was thick with tension, the silence between Sam and Ava heavier than before. She hadn't said much since the last dinner, her face still clouded with shame, a reflection of the way Colton and his family had treated her father. Sam could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she kept her gaze on the road, unable to meet his. She didn't need to apologize again, he knew that much. But the unease in her movements was undeniable. As they pulled up to the cabin, the same lavish exterior greeted them, big, imposing, and cold. It felt even more suffocating this time, like a house built to keep people out, not welcome them in. Sam felt a strange sense of foreboding as he stepped out of the car. The tall windows gleamed with artificial warmth, but it didn't reach him. The weight of everything, Colton, the loan, the manipulation, pressed down on his chest. Ava took a deep breath, glancing at her father before she led the way up the steps. Are you sure you want to do this, Dad? She asked quietly, her voice edged with concern. Sam met her gaze, offering a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. I'm sure. Let's see what they're really about. Inside, the atmosphere was just as polished as the last time, with the same cold, calculated hospitality. Roger stood to greet them, his handshake as stiff and rehearsed as always, the corners of his lips curling just slightly in what he probably thought was a welcoming gesture. Good to see you again, Sam, Roger said, his tone friendly, but there was a thin layer of impatience beneath it. I trust everything's been good? Ready to sign? Colton stood behind him, arms crossed, wearing that same smug expression that Sam had come to loathe. His eyes flicked toward Ava, then back to Sam. He seemed confident, like the deal was already sealed in his mind. But Sam wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing that. Not yet. Let's eat first, Sam said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something that didn't go unnoticed. He didn't want to rush into this. He needed to keep his wits about him. They thought they had him, but Sam was playing a different game. Dinner unfolded in the same uncomfortable pattern. Roger dominated the conversation, talking about real estate deals and investments, barely acknowledging Sam except for the occasional dismissive comment. Colton wasn't much better, his glances quick and calculating, like he was sizing Sam up, trying to determine when to make his move. Ava picked at her food, clearly uncomfortable but too polite to speak up. Sam could feel her eyes on him occasionally, but he didn't let it distract him. He had a job to do. Finally, after dessert, Roger slid the loan documents across the table with a flourish, the movement deliberate, almost too smooth. His eyes locked with Sam's, the unspoken challenge clear. I think we're all set now. All we need is your signature, and this will be taken care of." Sam didn't immediately reach for the papers. Instead, he stared at them for a long moment, his fingers tapping gently against his glass of water. He could feel Colton's eyes burning into him, could sense the impatience building in the air, like they expected him to cave, to sign away everything without a second thought. Roger leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering in an almost condescending tone. "I'm sure you understand the importance of this, Sam. This is a solid investment. You'll be helping Ava secure her future. Don't you want that?" Sam picked up the documents slowly, carefully, and began to read them. His eyes skimmed the pages, his movements deliberate, though he wasn't really reading. He had already seen enough. He knew what was at stake, what they were trying to pull. He let the silence hang in the air, letting them think he was on the edge of making a decision. Colton smirked from across the table, clearly eager to see Sam bend to the pressure. "Complicated for someone like you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm sure you've never seen anything like this before." Sam looked up slowly, meeting Colton's gaze with a faint smile, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "Very," he said softly, his tone calm, but carrying a weight that cut through the tension like a knife. The moment hung in the air, thick with expectation. Ava shifted in her seat, clearly caught between wanting to speak up and staying out of it. Sam could feel the pull of her unspoken concern, but he didn't let it sway him. Not now. With a final glance at the papers, Sam placed them back on the table, not signing them. He could feel the room freeze, the moment stretching out as if the air itself was holding its breath. "I'll take these home," Sam said, his voice cool, his expression impassive. "I'll give you my answer soon." Roger's smile faltered for a moment, just a fraction, but it was enough. Colton's eyes narrowed, the confidence slipping away, replaced by something darker, uncertainty. "Of course," Roger said, trying to recover his composure. "Take all the time you need." Sam stood up, his movements calm, controlled, and made his way toward the door. Ava stood as well, her eyes searching his face, but Sam didn't meet her gaze. He had to get out of there, he had to think. There was no way he was signing those papers, not without knowing everything, not without finding a way to flip the tables completely. As they stepped into the cold night air, Sam's mind raced, the pieces falling into place. He hadn't given them what they wanted, not yet, but he would, and when he did, it would be on his terms. The game was far from over. The phone's sudden ring cut through the stillness of the house like a jolt of electricity. Sam, who had been sitting in his chair by the window, staring out into the darkened streets, instinctively reached for it. He wasn't expecting any calls at this hour, not with everything that had transpired with Colton and his family. But when he saw Ava's name flash on the screen, his heart sank. The sound of her voice was the last thing he had expected to hear at this time of night, especially not under these circumstances. "Ava," Sam said, his voice steady, though his mind was already racing with worry. Her voice cracked before she even spoke, the tears already evident in her tone. "Dad, I don't know what to do. Colton, he yelled at me. He was so angry when I asked him about the loan, about what it really meant for us. He said I was questioning him, that I was undermining everything he was trying to do. He told me I should trust him and stop being so difficult." Sam's heart twisted. He could hear the pain in her voice, the rawness of it. She was always the peacemaker, always trying to smooth things over, to make everyone happy. To see her in this kind of distress, it was a blow to him that he wasn't prepared for. "Ava," Sam said gently, his words calm but filled with a depth of understanding, "it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Asking questions isn't a crime, and you have every right to know what's going on." But Ava's sobs only grew louder, and for a moment, Sam felt helpless. He hated hearing her like this, knowing she was trapped in a marriage with a man who wielded control as if it were his birthright. Sam had seen the subtle manipulation before, how Colton would twist words, gaslight her until she doubted herself. It was happening now, right under his nose, and he couldn't stand it. "I don't know what to do, Dad," Ava said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was helping, but now I feel like I'm the one ruining everything. He's never been like this before. I just wanted to make sure we were doing the right thing." Sam let out a long, steadying breath. You haven't ruined anything, sweetheart. Don't let him make you feel that way. You're doing the right thing by questioning him. You're not supposed to follow blindly, and Colton doesn't get to silence you. Don't let him get away with it. Ava's sobs quieted, but there was still an underlying tremor to her voice. I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to hurt anyone. Sam's heart clenched. You're not hurting anyone, Ava. You're protecting yourself. You deserve to know the truth. He stayed on the phone with her for a few more minutes, offering what little comfort he could until she finally calmed down enough to end the call. Sam stared at the phone for a long time after, feeling a surge of anger rising in him, a quiet fury that he had been keeping buried. Colton had crossed a line. He wasn't just trying to manipulate Ava, he was trying to control her, to break her spirit, and that Sam could not allow, not while he was still breathing. The clock struck midnight just as there was a knock on the door. Sam didn't need to ask who it was. He walked to the door and opened it to find Marcus standing there, his familiar face shadowed in the dim light of the porch. His expression was unreadable, but Sam could see the weight of the situation in his eyes. I figured you'd need me, Marcus said quietly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His gaze flicked toward the phone Sam had just put down. How's Ava? She's scared, Sam said, his voice low. She's been gaslit by Colton again, but she's going to be okay. Marcus nodded, but there was no time for pleasantries. He walked straight to the table, his lawyer instincts kicking in. You ready to hit back? Sam walked over and sat down beside him, pulling the pile of papers from the drawer. I've been waiting for this. The two of them spent the next few hours working in silence, the only sound the rustling of paper and the quiet hum of the lamp. Marcus worked quickly, pulling together counter-documents, gathering everything they needed to expose Colton's lies, false claims, hidden debts, and the contract that Sam had yet to sign, all of it built on the hope that Sam would be too trusting, too old to notice the details. But now, Sam saw it all, and Marcus was helping him put the pieces together, making sure they had all the ammunition they needed. As the night wore on, Sam signed the power of attorney forms that Marcus had prepared, ensuring that his legal ground would be secure. His hand moved mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere, already preparing for the fight that lay ahead. We move at dawn, Marcus said, standing up, his voice steady. We've got everything we need. Sam didn't respond right away. He was still lost in his thoughts, thinking of Ava, of Colton, of the years he'd spent trying to protect her from this very moment. He'd failed her in ways he couldn't undo, and now it was too late for apologies. As Marcus prepared to leave, Sam felt the weight of everything pressing on him. The anger had subsided, replaced by a deeper, more solemn grief. He stood at the window, staring out into the darkness. It was then that the first tear fell. He thought of Janelle, of the woman who had stood by him through everything, of the family they had lost. The grief was fresh, as sharp as it had ever been, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel it. But as the tear slid down his cheek, Sam made a silent vow. He would fix this. For Ava, for the life they had lost, for everything that was worth fighting for. And tomorrow, he would make sure Colton knew exactly who he had been messing with. The morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of a cool spring breeze as Sam stood by the window, watching the world wake up. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock and the faint sounds of birds in the distance. Sam had spent the last few hours preparing, laying out everything he needed for what was about to unfold. Today wasn't just another brunch. It was the first move in a game he hadn't wanted to play, but now there was no turning back. Ava was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She hadn't said much since the phone call the night before, but Sam could see it in her eyes, the anxiety, the doubt. She knew this was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. I don't know if I can do this, Dad, Ava said, her voice tight, almost a whisper. I feel like I'm betraying him. Colton, I know he's not perfect, but he's still my husband. Sam paused, his back turned to her as he adjusted the table settings. He'd spent his whole life in the shadows, never wanting to draw attention to himself or his family. But now, he couldn't hide. Not anymore. Colton had crossed a line, and it wasn't just about the loan. It was about trust. It was about control. "You're not betraying him, Ava," Sam said softly, his voice gentle but firm. He turned to face her, his expression steady. "You're protecting yourself. You've asked the right questions, and you deserve answers. Colton isn't going to give you those answers, so I will." Ava's eyes filled with uncertainty, but she nodded slowly, as if she knew this was the only way forward. She stood up, smoothing the front of her dress, and followed Sam to the dining room. The table was set simply, nothing extravagant. Sam wasn't looking to impress. He wasn't here to play nice. He was here to expose the truth. The doorbell rang, and Ava flinched, her breath catching in her throat. Sam gave her a reassuring glance before he went to answer it. Roger and Colton stood at the door, the two of them standing side by side, dressed in their usual sleek, polished outfits. Roger's suit was as perfectly tailored as always, his posture rigid with the kind of self-assuredness that only years of wealth and status could produce. Colton, too, was confident, perhaps a little too much so. His grin was tight, but it still carried that air of entitlement that Sam had come to detest. "Good morning, Sam," Roger said with a thin smile. "Thank you for inviting us. We weren't sure when we would hear from you again." Colton's eyes flicked toward Ava, but he didn't acknowledge her. His gaze lingered, calculating, before he finally stepped inside. "Yeah, you had us worried for a second there. I was starting to think maybe you'd changed your mind." Sam stood aside and let them in, his eyes narrowing slightly as they passed. He wasn't going to be caught off guard today, not now, not when everything was on the line. The atmosphere in the room shifted once everyone was seated at the table. Ava was quiet, her gaze fixed on her hands, her fingers tightly clasped. Sam sat across from Roger and Colton, his back straight, his face unreadable. He could feel the weight of the moment, the calm before the storm. "So," Roger began, breaking the silence, "we're here. What is it you wanted to discuss, Sam?" Sam let the tension hang for a moment before he spoke, his voice measured. "I looked into your project, Roger. The Mountain Lodge." Colton's eyes flickered with surprise, but he quickly masked it with a small laugh. "Oh, you don't have to worry about that, Sam. Everything's under control. We've got the right people involved." Sam didn't flinch. He reached for the folder on the table and slid it across to Roger and Colton. "It's more than just about the lodge," Sam said softly, his eyes locking with Roger's. "I've looked at your debts, both of you." Roger's face tightened, the smile fading from his lips as he glanced at the folder. Colton's hand shot out to grab it, but his fingers hesitated just a moment before he flipped it open. Sam watched their reactions carefully, the way their eyes darted over the documents, the way their bodies stiffened as they processed what they were seeing. Colton's usual cocky demeanor cracked. His hand shook slightly as he tried to control his reaction. This isn't what it looks like," he muttered, but the words fell flat. Roger, on the other hand, straightened up in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he tried to regain control. "Sam, you've got this all wrong. These are just temporary setbacks, nothing to be concerned about." Sam's gaze didn't waver. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "You approached the wrong man," he said calmly, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "You thought I was someone you could use, someone who wouldn't notice. But I've been in this game long enough to know when someone's trying to play me." Roger opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Colton sat frozen, unable to hide the panic creeping into his eyes. Ava's gaze flickered between the three men, her breath shallow, her hands clenched tightly on her lap. Sam could feel her uncertainty, but he knew he was doing the right thing. This wasn't about Colton's pride. It was about putting an end to the manipulation, to the lies. Sam sat back, his expression unreadable as he watched the weight of the evidence settle in. The room was heavy now, thick with the unspoken truths they could no longer avoid. The tables had turned, and just like that, Sam knew. The game was finally in his hands. The tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate anyone who dared breathe too deeply. Sam sat there, unmoving, as Roger and Colton scrambled to make sense of what they were looking at. The folders Sam had handed them contained not just the evidence of their debts, but a collection of truths they had hoped would stay buried. Lies, manipulation, and greed had finally been dragged into the light, and Sam wasn't about to let them wriggle free. A long silence stretched out, the kind that could drive a person mad with anticipation. Roger was the first to speak, his voice tight with frustration. He slammed the folder shut, his face red with anger. "This is a joke, right?" he sneered, his eyes darting between Sam and the papers. "You think these documents mean anything? We're not dumb, Sam. This is just a bluff. You've got nothing." Colton, who had been watching his father's outburst with growing unease, finally snapped, his voice rising in panic. "Dad, this can't be happening. We're this close, Roger, this close to getting everything we need. Why is this happening now?" Roger shot Colton a sharp look, his hands clenching into fists. "It's your fault," he snapped, his voice dripping with venom. "You were supposed to keep everything under control. You were supposed to make it happen, and now we're sitting here, looking at this." The blame, the anger, it was like a storm brewing, and it was finally boiling over. Roger turned to Sam, his face twisted in disbelief and fury. "You think this means anything, huh? You think these papers are going to make me buckle? Well, they won't. We've played this game longer than you, Sam. You're bluffing." Sam's gaze never wavered. His hands were steady as he reached into the folder, pulling out a single piece of paper. He didn't rush. His movements were calm, deliberate. He had nothing to prove. He slid the bank printout across the table to Roger and Colton, watching their faces as they saw what was in front of them. Roger's eyes flickered to the printout, his expression briefly registering confusion. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Colton, already on edge, leaned forward, trying to make sense of what he was looking at. The silence grew heavier. Sam spoke softly, his voice cool, like a man offering a lesson that no one wanted to learn. "I never needed to prove it," he said, his words measured, but cutting through the room like a scalpel. "But now, I think it's time you understood who you're dealing with." Roger swallowed hard, his face pale, his jaw tight. Colton's hand trembled slightly as he ran his fingers over the paper, his breath shallow. The numbers on the printout were clear: bank balances, assets, investment portfolios, and the amount of money Sam had stashed away was staggering. They had underestimated him. They had thought he was just an old man, a retired musician with nothing to his name but memories. But in that moment, Sam knew without a doubt that they were beginning to see the truth. Beth, who had been quiet up until now, gasped audibly, her face contorting in shock as she leaned forward in her seat. "You're wealthy?" she whispered, the disbelief heavy in her voice, like she couldn't fathom it. The question was a mix of astonishment and something else. Maybe envy, maybe regret, but most certainly shame. Sam didn't look at her. He didn't need to. She had already shown her true colors, and her reaction now was meaningless. Ava, who had been sitting quietly at the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, blinked back tears. Her eyes went wide as she saw the printout, her mind clearly struggling to process everything. She looked from the paper to her father, to the stunned faces of Colton and his parents, and back again. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, but she didn't wipe them away. They were the tears of someone who had been deceived, of someone who had placed her trust in the wrong person. Her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke, her words trembling. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" Sam's heart clenched at the question. He had hoped she would never have to know. He had hoped she would find her own way, her own independence, without the weight of his wealth hanging over her. But now it was out in the open. She was seeing the man she thought she knew in a completely new light, and Sam hated that. Hated that it had come to this. "I wanted you to be independent, Ava," he said quietly, his voice thick with regret. "I never wanted you to feel like you owed me anything. I wanted you to build your own life, not lean on me. But I can see now how wrong I was." Ava's eyes filled with more tears, but she didn't speak again. The room was heavy with the weight of the truth. Colton's smirk was gone now. He was no longer the confident man who had walked into this house just hours ago, expecting to manipulate Sam into signing the papers. He was silent, his gaze flicking between his parents and Sam, his earlier arrogance gone, replaced by something darker. Fear. Roger's silence, too, spoke volumes. The facade he had so carefully constructed over the years was crumbling, and he didn't know how to put it back together. The Reeves family, so sure of their control, was now speechless, unable to comprehend how they had so thoroughly misjudged Sam. The quiet stretched on, the weight of the moment sinking in. Sam sat back in his chair, his gaze steady, unwavering. The game was changing, and now it was his turn to make the next move. But as the silence continued to stretch, Sam felt the heaviness of what was to come. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The tension in the room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken words and resentments. The Reeves family had taken their seats at the table once more, but this time, there was no warmth in the space between them. Sam could feel the weight of the moment, the inevitability of what was about to happen. Ava sat across from Colton, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her shoulders hunched as though she were bracing for impact. Sam knew this wasn't just a dinner anymore. This was the moment that everything would crack wide open. Ava had been quiet, her eyes flicking from Colton to her father, trying to make sense of what she was hearing, of everything she had learned. The secrets, the manipulation, the lies. How had she not seen it before? Her gaze lingered on Colton, and for the first time, Sam saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't love or admiration. It was anger, betrayal. The hurt was raw, almost palpable. Without warning, Ava stood up, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound. Colton's head snapped up, his eyes flicking between her and the others, a sudden flicker of unease crossing his features. Colton, Ava's voice trembled, but there was strength in it now, a firmness that hadn't been there before. You used my father. You manipulated him, and you tried to use me to get what you wanted. I'm not stupid, and I'm not blind. She paused, her chest rising and falling with each breath. I should have seen it, but I didn't, and now I know. Colton's face twisted in disbelief, his jaw tightening, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, with a forced chuckle, he stood up, his voice laced with venom. You embarrassed us, Ava. You've humiliated us in front of your father. You don't get it, do you? This is business. What's between us? It was always about the future, about security. He stepped forward, his eyes darkening with frustration. And now you're turning on me? Ava's hands clenched at her sides, her fingernails digging into her palms. The words stung, but she didn't flinch. I didn't turn on you, Colton, she said quietly, but her voice had a hard edge. You turned on me a long time ago. I just didn't see it. I thought I was doing the right thing by trusting you, but you've been using me, using my father, for your own gain. Roger, who had been watching this exchange from the head of the table, suddenly straightened, trying to salvage what little dignity was left in the room. Ava, he said, his voice forced, too smooth to be genuine. Let's not make this worse than it already is. We're all just trying to find a way to... A way to what, Roger? Sam interjected, his voice low but cutting through the thick tension in the room. A way to save face? To maintain control? You've been playing games with my daughter, and now you want to pretend like it's all about protecting her? His voice softened, but there was no mistaking the finality in his words. No, it's too late for that. Roger's face flushed, his attempt to repair the situation falling flat. He opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came out. Colton, looking more and more agitated, glared at Sam and Ava, his hands clenched at his sides. Ava shook her head, her voice breaking through the silence. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when I know it's not. You've lied to me, Colton. You've lied to both of us, and I won't let you keep doing it. The room fell silent again, heavy with the weight of Ava's words. Sam watched her, his heart aching for her. He had seen her try to hold everything together for so long, trying to protect her marriage, trying to hold on to what was left of it. But now she had to face the truth, and it was breaking her. Ava's eyes locked with Colton's one last time, and there was nothing but cold resolve in them now. I'm leaving, she said, her voice clear and strong. I need space. I need time to figure out what's next. I'm separating from you. Temporarily. The words hit Colton like a slap, and for the first time, Sam saw real vulnerability in his son-in-law's eyes. He looked at Ava as though he couldn't understand what was happening, as though the ground beneath him had just shifted. But Sam didn't feel pity for him. Not anymore. Ava turned away, her footsteps measured, purposeful. She didn't look back, didn't hesitate. She walked out of the room, and the weight of her decision was almost palpable in the air. Sam could feel it, the finality of her choice. Without saying anything more, Sam stood up from his seat. He moved to follow her, his steps steady, but filled with purpose. When he reached the door, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, guiding her out of the room. "You choose your future," Sam said softly, his voice steady and reassuring. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had lost. It was a reminder that she had control now. She wasn't bound by the choices Colton had made for her anymore. Ava nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek as she looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what's next, but I'm done pretending." Sam pulled her into a quiet hug, holding her close for a moment before stepping back. "I'll be here for you, no matter what." As they walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of the dinner behind them, Sam's mind raced with the questions ahead. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, Ava had made a choice. And now, Sam knew, it was time for him to make his move. The morning after the confrontation, Sam sat at his desk, his fingers tapping lightly against the wood as he stared out the window. The weight of what had happened the night before, Ava's decision, her break from Colton, lingered in the air, but Sam knew that the hardest part was still ahead. He had taken the first step in exposing the truth, but now it was time to hit back, to ensure that Colton and Roger paid for their manipulation. Marcus had been working tirelessly, as Sam expected, drafting up the necessary legal documents. His phone buzzed with a text just as Sam stood up to grab his coat. He read the message, his lips tightening. The fraud exposure had been filed with the lender. The gears were in motion. Sam had seen the stakes. Colton and Roger had relied on Sam's naivety, thinking they could pull the wool over his eyes and leverage his name to save themselves. But they didn't realize just how far Sam was willing to go. What they didn't know was that Marcus had already dug into the Reeves financials, discovered the hidden debts, and found the cracks in their so-called empire. "They're going to feel this one," Marcus had said the night before. Sam knew it was more than just about money now. It was about exposing a lifetime of lies, breaking the false image of respectability the Reeves family had carefully built, and that was exactly what they were going to do. By noon, the news began to trickle in. Sam could hear it in the murmur of the office, the gossip circulating through the community. Roger's company had lost its pending credit line. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the direct result of the legal action Marcus had filed, the fraud exposure hitting the lender like a shockwave. Without that credit line, the Reeves real estate business, which had been on the brink of collapsing, was now effectively dead. Sam wasn't there to witness it, but he could imagine Roger's face when the phone call came in. The arrogant confidence, the carefully crafted mask, had shattered. He'd been trying to play Sam for a fool, but now the tables had turned. But the consequences didn't stop there. A few hours later, as if to add insult to injury, Colton received his own dose of reality. He opened an official letter from the state's business licensing board, informing him that his business license was under review due to suspicious activities. The words felt like a punch to the gut, but it was no surprise. Colton had been living on borrowed time, skating on thin ice while hoping no one would dig deep enough to uncover his misdeeds. Sam didn't feel the satisfaction he expected, though. He didn't relish the idea of Colton's empire crumbling, even if it was built on lies and deceit. All he could think about was Ava, his daughter, whose heart had been broken by the man who was now facing the consequences of his greed. But the Reeves downfall didn't stop there. As the day wore on, the media caught wind of the growing scandal. Stories of fraudulent loans, shady business practices, and a family's carefully curated image of wealth and respectability began to spread like wildfire. Colton's name, once associated with success and charm, was now linked to deception. As if on cue, the Reeves family, in an attempt to salvage whatever was left of their image, tried to shift the blame onto Sam. A press release was issued, claiming that Sam had been the one orchestrating the fraudulent loan dealings. The claim was ludicrous, a desperate attempt to pull the wool over the public's eyes. But Colton and Roger were panicked now. They were cornered, and the only thing they could do was deflect. But they underestimated Marcus. Within hours, Marcus had released full documentation to the press. Detailed records of the loan requests, the falsified claims, and the debts that had been hidden from view. The truth was out there for anyone who cared to look. The full scope of the Reeves lies was laid bare, their facade of power and wealth disintegrating in front of everyone. Sam knew that this would be the point of no return. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. The community, once enamored with the Reeves' opulence, now saw them for what they were, opportunistic scammers. Roger, Colton, and Beth, all of them, once untouchable in their social circles, were now the subject of scorn and ridicule. Their social status collapsed as quickly as it had been built. Colton's name was dragged through the mud, and Roger's reputation, forged in years of self-promotion and manipulation, was now a distant memory. The phone rang. It was Ava. Sam answered it immediately, his heart heavy. He didn't need to ask how she was. He could hear it in her voice. There was relief, yes, but also something else. Sadness. The life she had known was in pieces. The person she had married, the man she thought she could trust, now nothing more than a shadow of what he had once seemed to be. "I know," Sam said quietly into the phone, the weight of it all settling in his chest. "But this is over now. We'll get through this. You'll get through this." Ava didn't say anything at first, and Sam could hear her breathing, the tension in her voice. Finally, she spoke, her words soft but resolute. "It's not just about Colton, Dad. It's everything. The lies, the people I trusted. It feels like everything's falling apart." Sam let out a quiet sigh, his mind spinning. "I know, sweetheart. But sometimes, things have to fall apart before they can be rebuilt." As he spoke, he glanced at the window, watching the rain begin to fall in slow sheets, the world outside blurring in the storm. Everything was changing. There was no going back now. But there was one thing Sam knew for sure. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The drive to the mountain lodge was eerily quiet. The landscape outside the car window seemed to blur into a monotony of trees and fog as Sam focused on the road ahead. Ava sat next to him, her hands resting on her lap, her fingers occasionally tightening, as though she were holding on to something unseen, something fragile. Sam could feel the weight of her silence, the confusion and regret that still clung to her, and he knew that this visit, the first time she would see the lodge in person, was a moment of reckoning. Ava had spent so much time trying to protect the image of her marriage, of the life she had built with Colton, that she had never fully seen the cracks. Now, those cracks were gaping, and there was no turning back. Sam could sense her internal struggle as she stared out the window, but he didn't press her to speak. She would come to him when she was ready. When they arrived at the lodge, Sam didn't need to say anything. The building loomed in front of them, half-finished, a shell of what it was supposed to be. The concrete foundation was cracked in places, the windows still boarded up, and construction debris littered the yard like forgotten dreams. The design had always been grand, too grand for their means, but now it looked abandoned, cold, and lifeless. The project that Colton had hyped up as a family legacy was nothing more than a money pit, a monument to ambition gone wrong. Ava opened the car door slowly, as if unsure whether she was stepping into a memory or a nightmare. She hesitated, looking at the half-built lodge, as though seeing it for the first time. The grandeur of it was lost now, replaced by the cold reality of what it represented. Colton's promise of a perfect future, of something better, had turned into a crumbling house of cards. Sam walked around the car, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached the building. The silence was unsettling. There were no sounds of construction, no workers moving around, just emptiness. The air smelled faintly of wood and dampness, but it felt sterile, as if the place itself had been abandoned long before its time. Ava stood beside him, looking up at the structure with a mixture of awe and disbelief. I don't understand, she whispered, almost to herself. How did we get here? This wasn't the dream he promised. Sam looked at the building, his face unreadable. This is what shortcuts build, he said quietly, his voice laced with disappointment. He turned to Ava, his eyes softening. It looks like nothing more than a hollow shell, Colton's so-called legacy. It's built on lies, Ava. It was never about creating something real. It was always about appearances. Ava's throat tightened, and she took a shaky breath, her gaze drifting to the exposed beams and the unfinished walls. I wanted to believe in it. I wanted to believe in him, she said, her voice cracking. She looked at Sam, the weight of it all crashing down on her. I was so blinded. All those little things, the lies, the promises, the ways he made me feel like I was part of something grand. I should have seen the signs. I should have known. Sam stepped closer to her, his presence a quiet comfort in the midst of her storm. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and grounding. Love blinds us all sometimes, he said softly, his voice filled with understanding. He knew the pain of wanting something so badly, of trying to hold on to a dream that had never been real. He had watched it happen with Janelle. He knew the toll it took. Ava closed her eyes, the tears threatening to spill over, but she held them back. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being a good wife, supporting him, believing in his vision. She wiped a tear from her cheek, a shaky exhale escaping her lips. But it wasn't my dream, it was his, and now, it's all falling apart. Sam pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly, offering a sense of safety that only a father could provide. For a moment, they stood there together, in the shadow of the broken lodge, as the wind whistled through the skeletal beams. Sam didn't need to say anything more. He knew the weight of what Ava was feeling, the sense of betrayal, the regret, the painful realization that everything she had invested in was a mirage. After a long pause, Ava pulled back, her eyes red but resolute. I'm tired, Dad, she said, her voice low but steady. Tired of living in someone else's dream. I've been following Colton's vision for too long, trying to make it fit, trying to make it work, but it's never been mine, and I don't want to keep doing it. Sam's heart swelled with pride, though a pang of sadness lingered. His daughter was finally seeing it, finally understanding what it meant to reclaim her own life. You're stronger than you realize, Ava, he said softly. You don't need to carry someone else's weight anymore. You've been trying to build a life around someone else's vision for too long. Now, it's time for you to build your own. Ava nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, but this time it was different. This time, there was a sense of clarity in her eyes, a new determination that Sam hadn't seen before. She had made her decision. I want independence, Dad, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I need to figure out who I am without all of this, without him. Sam squeezed her hand, his voice low but firm. Then we'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to do this alone. As they turned to leave the half-built lodge behind, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty space, Sam knew that Ava's journey was just beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she was walking it on her own terms. And Sam, as always, would be there to support her. But even as they walked away, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that Colton wasn't finished yet. The storm hadn't passed. It was just gathering strength. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the parking lot as Sam walked out of the grocery store, the bag of essentials in his hand. The quiet of the day, the hum of distant traffic, the chirp of birds, felt strangely out of place against the tension in his chest. He had been through this before, the calm before the storm, the deep breath before everything came crashing down. But this time, Sam could feel it. He wasn't just facing an enemy. He was facing the culmination of everything he'd fought for, and it was finally coming to a head. He turned toward his car, but before he could even reach the door, a voice sliced through the air, sharp and demanding. Sam! Sam froze, his grip on the grocery bag tightening. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Colton. The voice was raw, desperate. the kind of voice that a man uses when he's cornered, when he realizes his empire is crumbling around him. Colton stormed toward him, his face twisted with anger, his steps fast and aggressive, like a man determined to drag someone into the mud with him. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Colton's voice was shaking, the words laced with both fury and fear. "You don't get it, Sam. You need to fix this. You need to fix my life now." Sam didn't move. He stood tall, his posture steady, every inch of him refusing to be intimidated. He had seen Colton's type before, desperate, broken beneath the weight of his own lies. But Sam had never been the type to cower. Not in front of Colton, not in front of anyone. "Fix your life?" Sam said slowly, his voice cutting through the space between them. "You tried to cheat an old man, Colton. You tried to play me like a fool. You used my name to cover your own debts, your own lies, and you thought I wouldn't notice." Colton's face flushed, his jaw clenching, as he took a step forward, his eyes wide with panic. He was unraveling. Sam could see it in his eyes, the realization that he was losing everything he'd built, that the facade he'd spent years constructing was now nothing more than dust in the wind. "I didn't want this," Colton spat, his voice breaking. "I didn't want any of this to happen. You, Ava, this family, you were all supposed to be a part of my success. I needed you." He was practically pleading now, his hands gesturing wildly as though trying to grab hold of something, anything. "You think I wanted to get here? I was trying to build something for us, for her, for Ava, and you're just standing there, watching everything fall apart." Sam watched him, his face unreadable. He had heard the same excuses before, from people who tried to justify their mistakes, from people who couldn't own their failures. Colton's voice trembled, but Sam wasn't moved by the desperation. He had seen the manipulation too many times. "You've always tried to control everything, Colton," Sam said, his voice calm but firm. "You've used Ava. You've used me. And you've used this whole damn thing to cover up your own shortcomings. You wanted power, and when you didn't get it, you thought you could just force it. Well, it doesn't work like that." Colton stood there, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath, his hands balled into fists at his sides. The panic in his eyes had now shifted to something darker, shame. For the first time, Sam saw it, the fear of losing everything. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Colton muttered, more to himself than to Sam. "I was just trying to make it work. I thought if I could get this right, Ava would see what I was doing. But now..." His voice trailed off, the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. "Now I've lost her, haven't I?" Sam took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving Colton's. There was no pity in his eyes, no satisfaction, just cold truth. "You've already lost her," Sam said softly, the words sinking in with an unsettling finality. "Ava saw who you really are. She's not going to stand by you anymore, not after everything you've done." Colton's breath caught in his throat, his face crumpling with the weight of the realization. His hands trembled, and for a moment, he looked like a man who had been utterly broken, not by financial loss, but by the loss of the only thing he had ever truly cared about. The woman who had loved him, who had trusted him. Sam let the silence hang between them, the heaviness of the moment settling like a shadow. Colton's face twisted with a combination of rage and regret, and for the first time, Sam saw him not as the man who had tried to use him, but as a man who had lost his way. "You did this to yourself, Colton," Sam said quietly. "You've made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." Colton's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as the words settled in. He didn't speak, just stood there, his gaze lost, as though he had finally seen the full extent of his mistakes. He had no more excuses, no more lies to tell. Slowly, without a word, Colton turned away from Sam, his face hollow with defeat. With one final look over his shoulder, as if searching for some last bit of hope, he walked away, defeated, broken, and completely alone. Sam watched him go, the weight of the confrontation lifting, as Colton disappeared from view. But even as Colton left, the lingering question remained. What was left for Ava now? Would she be able to rebuild, to heal from the years of manipulation and deceit? Sam didn't know. But he would be there for her, every step of the way. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun. The courthouse was quieter than Ava had imagined. She had envisioned a cacophony of voices, an overwhelming sense of urgency and finality. But instead, it was calm, almost sterile, the air thick with the weight of decisions yet to be made. She sat in the lobby, her fingers running over the edges of the separation papers, the ink still fresh on the page. Her heart felt like it was racing, yet the rest of her body was frozen, stuck in a moment she couldn't seem to escape. Sam sat beside her, his presence steady and grounding. He hadn't said much, and she hadn't expected him to. His support was quiet, unspoken, a constant that made this unbearable situation feel just a little more bearable. Ava could hear the steady beat of his breath, the reassuring rhythm that had been with her whole life. It was the only thing keeping her from breaking down completely. "I don't know if I can do this," Ava said, her voice barely more than a whisper. She stared down at the papers in her hands, her fingers trembling as she gripped them tighter. The weight of the decision felt almost too heavy to bear. She had known this day was coming, but standing on the edge of it, with the reality of her marriage, her life, shattering before her, felt surreal. Sam didn't say anything at first, just reached over and gently placed a hand on hers, squeezing it lightly. "You're not alone, Ava. We'll get through this." Her eyes welled with tears, but she held them back, blinking rapidly as if to stop the flood from breaking through. It wasn't the first time Sam had been there for her, and it wasn't the first time he had to watch her make a choice that would change her life forever. But this felt different. This wasn't just about Colton and the lies. This was about Ava choosing herself for the first time in her life, choosing her own path, free of the man who had deceived her and manipulated her at every turn. When they were called into the courtroom, Ava stood, taking a deep breath before walking toward the door. Sam followed closely behind, his presence a quiet comfort in the sea of unknowns. The room was small, with just a few other people scattered about, couples, individuals, all here for the same reason. But to Ava, it felt as though the entire world was watching, waiting for her to make a decision she couldn't take back. Colton was already seated in front of the judge's desk when they entered, his face a mask of tight control, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the cracks in his composure. Ava couldn't help but notice how different he looked, more tired, more defeated than she had ever seen him. The man who once carried himself with such confidence and swagger now looked small, like he was trying to hold everything together and failing. When the judge addressed them, Colton spoke first. "I accept full responsibility for the breakdown of our marriage," he said, his voice even, though there was a slight tremor in the words. He glanced briefly at Ava, but she didn't look back at him. I made mistakes. I wasn't the man I promised her I would be." Ava's stomach turned as she listened to him. The sincerity in his voice seemed forced, like the words didn't come naturally, like he was still trying to save face. He wasn't sorry for betraying her. He was sorry that he had been caught. Sam's hand remained on Ava's back, his touch a silent reminder of the strength she had inside her. "I'm glad you're taking responsibility," the judge said, his voice neutral, but there was no warmth in it. "But this is not just about accepting fault. It's about what happens next." Ava felt the weight of the papers in her hand. It wasn't just a formality. This was her future, her independence, everything she had wanted, but had been too afraid to claim. She handed the papers to the judge, her hand shaking slightly, but she didn't look back at Colton. She didn't want to see his face anymore. After a brief exchange between the judge and the lawyers, the judge nodded, writing something down. Then he looked up at Ava. "I hereby grant you full independence," he said, his voice final. "Your request for separation is approved." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Ava couldn't process them. Full independence. She had done it. She had taken back control of her life, and now there was nothing standing in her way. Colton's expression faltered, the weight of the decision settling on him. He had hoped to salvage something, anything, from this, but it was gone. Just like that. His eyes flickered toward Ava, and for a moment, she saw it. The fear, the regret, the realization that he had lost everything. but even in that moment, there was no apology in his eyes. Just defeat. He rose from his chair, his shoulders slumped, and without another word, he turned and left the courtroom. There was nothing left to say. As the finality of the moment settled over Ava, Sam stood beside her, offering a quiet smile. "You did it," he said softly. His eyes were full of pride, and it was the first time in a long while that Ava felt like she was standing on solid ground. Outside the courthouse, as they walked toward the car, Ava's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw an email from Beth, Colton's mother. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she opened it. The message was short, an apology for how things had gone, an apology for how they had treated Sam. Ava stared at the email, her fingers itching to reply, to finally confront Beth about the years of passive aggression and judgment. But instead, she pressed delete. No words, no explanation, just a final decision that felt right. As the car pulled away from the courthouse, Ava looked out the window, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had made it through the hardest part. Now, the future was hers to create, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was ready to face it head on. But as she glanced over at Sam, the thought lingered. What would Colton do next? The answer was still unknown, but Ava knew one thing for sure. She would never let him dictate her life again. The small cabin nestled in the woods, far from the bustle of everyday life, was exactly what Sam had hoped for. A quiet sanctuary where the noise of the world could fall away, leaving just the two of them. The crisp air of early spring cut through the stillness, but inside, the cabin was warm, cozy. There was a fire crackling in the stone hearth, the scent of pine and wood smoke filling the room. Ava stood at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables with a focused intensity. Her movements sharp, precise, but still carrying a softness Sam hadn't seen in a long time. It was a simple evening, nothing extravagant, but the simplicity of it felt grounding. They weren't trying to fix anything with grand gestures. They weren't trying to rush through the pain. They were just being together. Ava had insisted on cooking, determined to take the first step toward finding some kind of peace. Sam hadn't objected, watching her work with a small smile on his face as he moved to set the table. The tension of the last few weeks, of the divorce, of Colton's lies, of the uncertainty, still hung in the air. But here, it felt distant. The cabin, with its peeling wood and quiet corners, provided an anchor, a space where the past could stay just that, the past. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that felt like enough. "You know," Ava said after a while, her voice breaking the silence, "I don't think I've ever really understood you, Dad." She set the knife down, wiping her hands on a towel before turning to face him. Her expression was uncertain, like she was trying to untangle something complex inside her. "I know you've always been there for me, but I don't know who you are, who you really are." Sam looked up at her, his eyes steady but soft. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice calm. He hadn't expected this, but something about it felt right. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding from the truth. "I don't know," Ava continued, her voice growing more introspective. "You've always been quiet, mysterious in a way. I never really understood why you didn't talk about your past, about Mom, or anything really. I thought you were just an ordinary guy with ordinary dreams. I thought you were just Dad. But now, everything's different. I don't know what's real." Sam walked over to the fire, staring into the dancing flames for a moment. He had never been one for grand revelations, never the type to offer up his past like a neatly wrapped gift. His life with Janelle had been a quiet one, full of love, but also full of silence. The music, the stage, the years of touring and playing in dimly lit clubs. That was a different world, one he had left behind when he became a father. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, but with a warmth that had always been there. "I didn't want you to see me as something more than what I was for you. I wanted you to have your own life, Ava, to build something without the weight of my past, my mistakes." Ava looked at him closely, her expression shifting as she tried to understand. "But you were someone, Dad. You were more than just Dad." Her eyes softened as she stepped closer to him, the realization hitting her with a quiet force. I've always assumed you were less than you really were. Sam let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. I'm not sure that's the way I would put it, but I understand why you thought that. I never wanted you to carry the burden of what I did before we moved here. The music, the nights spent away from home. It wasn't the life I wanted for you. So I chose to stay quiet. I chose to give you space to live your life without the distractions of my past. Ava's face flushed with the weight of her own assumptions, a deep regret creeping into her voice. I'm sorry, Dad, she said, her words carrying a quiet sincerity. I assumed you were boring, that you didn't have any adventures. I thought you were just waiting for me to grow up so you could retire to a quiet life. But you lived. You lived in a way I didn't understand, and I'm sorry for not seeing that. Sam smiled at her, a genuine warmth radiating from him. Ava, love blinds us all sometimes, he said, his voice a little more tender than before. You were just a kid when I decided to put down the music. You didn't know the man I was then. You only knew the man I became, and that man, he's always been there for you. That's all that matters. Ava felt the weight in her chest lighten as she took a deep breath, realizing the truth of her father's words. She had spent so much time caught up in the illusions of Colton's world, the dream of a perfect life, that she had never stopped to think about her father's own dreams, his own life. The man who had raised her, who had been the quiet, strong constant in her life, wasn't just a backdrop to her own story. He was the main character in his own. I don't want to live in a dream anymore, Ava said softly, her voice steady. I want to live in the real world, the one I've been avoiding. I want to live my life, on my own terms. Sam nodded, his pride in her clear as day. And you will, he said, his voice calm and certain. You're stronger than you know. I'll be here to help you, always. But this is your life, Ava, your journey. She smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek as she hugged him tightly. I love you, Dad. I love you too, he whispered, holding her close. The fire crackled in the background, the warmth from the flames mingling with the warmth between them. As the fire slowly burned out, the future no longer seemed so uncertain. Ava had made her choice. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was walking it with her head held high. But even as they sat in that cabin, surrounded by the silence of the woods, the questions remained. Would Colton try to fight for her again? Could she truly move forward, or would the past continue to haunt her? Sam knew that the answers weren't clear, but for the first time, Ava was ready to face whatever came next. Alone, but not alone. The small jazz club downtown was tucked away in an alley, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the evening air. It wasn't the kind of place that attracted crowds for its lavish decor or flashy exterior. No, this place was different. It was about the music, raw, unfiltered, and alive. It was a venue where the sounds of saxophones and trumpets bled into the walls, where the weight of years past hung thick in the air. For Sam, this was home, or at least it used to be. Marcus had arranged the night. Nothing big, just a small gathering of regulars, a few old friends, and some newcomers who had caught wind of the event. Sam wasn't expecting a crowd. This wasn't about filling seats or making a big splash. It was about something else, about reclaiming a piece of himself that he thought he had left behind. The moment Sam stepped through the back door, he was hit with the familiar smell of worn leather, whiskey, and the faintest scent of cigarette smoke. He hadn't been in a jazz club in years. Not since his retirement. Not since the days of dimly lit stages and the steady hum of a live band. It all felt like a lifetime ago, yet as he stood there, a part of him remembered. The old fire, the rhythm of the music that had once driven his every decision, every move, it was still there. Ava stood by the bar, her eyes fixed on her father as he walked into the room. She had insisted on coming, had begged him to perform, but Sam hadn't wanted her to see him this way, vulnerable, out of practice. She didn't understand what it meant for him to return to the stage, not after so many years of silence. But now, as she watched him step into the spotlight once again, the pride she felt was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about music. This was about watching her father return to who he truly was. Sam walked to the stage, his heart beating steadily in his chest. He hadn't picked up his saxophone in so long, hadn't felt the weight of the instrument against his lips in years, but tonight the sound would flow from him naturally, as if no time had passed at all. Marcus gave him a knowing nod from behind the piano and the band began to play. The soft clink of glasses and murmurs from the crowd faded into the background as Sam lifted his saxophone to his mouth. The first notes filled the air, hesitant at first, but quickly growing in confidence. The music wrapped around the room like a familiar embrace, drawing the audience in. Ava stood silently at the bar, her eyes wide, watching her father breathe life into the music. She had heard stories of his past, his time as a jazz musician, the years spent on the road, the energy that pulsed through his performances. But she had never seen it. Not like this. Not with her own eyes. Sam lost himself in the music, in the familiar rhythms that had once been his everything. The pain, the weight of the years he had spent hidden away from the world, began to melt away. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole. The crowd, too, seemed to sense it. Their murmurs died down as they listened, their attention rapt as Sam's saxophone wove its way through the familiar melodies. He was no longer the man who had been forced into silence. He was the man who had once lived for the music, and for the first time in years, that man was alive again. When the final note hung in the air, the crowd erupted into applause, the sound of clapping and cheering filling the space with a warmth Sam hadn't expected. He looked out at them, his chest heavy with emotion, and nodded in gratitude. But his eyes, always searching, found Ava in the crowd. She stood, silent and still, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. There was nothing but admiration in her gaze, nothing but love. It had been so long since he had felt this kind of recognition. Sam's name, once synonymous with jazz, still held weight. People remembered him. The music remembered him. And in that moment, he remembered himself too. Back at the bar, Ava's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her fingers shaking slightly as she read the notification. It was a social media clip, one that had been posted by someone in the crowd. It was a short video of Sam playing, the sound of the saxophone still fresh in the air, the rawness of the moment captured in a few seconds. Ava stared at it, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her lips. But then her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing as she saw the name attached to the video. Colton. He had seen the clip. His name had been tagged in the post, and as Ava clicked on his profile, she saw it. His message, "What have I lost?" It was brief, but the weight of the words hung heavy. Colton hadn't even been at the performance, but it didn't matter. The realization had settled in. He had lost not just Ava, but the life he had once thought he could control. Ava looked up from the phone, her heart pounding, but then she turned back to Sam. He was standing there, his face glowing with the kind of contentment that only came from doing what you were born to do. She didn't need Colton's validation anymore. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had seen who her father truly was. And as the music faded, as the night wrapped itself around them, Ava knew that she was ready to move forward, not for Colton, not for anyone else, but for herself. But as they walked out of the club together, the question still lingered in the air. Would Colton accept the truth, or would he continue fighting to claim something that was already lost? The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Ava wasn't going to let fear dictate her future anymore. The past was behind her now, and the future, no matter how uncertain, was hers to shape. The house was small, modest, but to Ava it was everything. It wasn't grand or fancy, nothing like the mountain lodge that had once symbolized Colton's empty promises. But this was different. This was hers. The walls were freshly painted in soft shades of cream, the floors warm with honey-colored wood that creaked slightly underfoot. It smelled like new beginnings, like a future she could finally take control of. Sam had bought it for her, but not just as a gesture. It was an act of trust, of believing in her strength to carve out her own path. Ava stood in the kitchen, the space small but inviting. She ran her fingers over the edge of the counter, feeling the smooth wood under her touch. There was no sense of being overwhelmed here, no coldness. The light from the window poured in, bathing the room in a soft glow that made everything feel peaceful, grounded. This was the kind of home she had always wanted, one where she could breathe freely, without the weight of anyone else's expectations pressing down on her. Sam stood in the doorway, watching her silently, his gaze soft with something like pride. He hadn't said much about the house. He didn't need to. He had done this for her, to give her the chance to stand on her own 2 feet without anyone else holding her back. But it wasn't just about the house. It was about freedom. Rachel arrived later that afternoon, carrying a bouquet of flowers in her hands, a broad smile across her face. The three of them had barely spoken since Sam's return to town, but now there was a quiet understanding between them. Rachel had always been there for Ava, even when she didn't know how to be. Now she was back, ready to help Ava build this new chapter. "Look at you two," Rachel said, her voice warm, as she stepped into the kitchen and set the flowers down on the counter. "I can't believe it's real." She looked between Sam and Ava, her eyes brimming with emotion. "It's good to see you both like this, whole." Ava swallowed, feeling a knot of emotion tightening in her throat. She had spent so long in the shadows of other people's lives, trying to live up to expectations that were never hers to meet. But now she had a chance to build something real, and the support of the people who loved her made all the difference. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all of this," Ava said softly, her voice shaking just a little. "But I want to do better. I want to be better, for the people who deserve me." She looked at Sam, her eyes searching for something. Permission, maybe, or understanding. Sam didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Then start with yourself," he said simply. His words weren't judgmental. They weren't heavy with expectation. They were gentle, a reminder that the path she had ahead of her wasn't one of perfection. It was one of self-acceptance, of growth. Ava let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She nodded, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. This was her beginning. This was her choice. It wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about stepping forward, even when the future was uncertain. Later, they sat at the small dining table. The food was simple, a roast chicken, roasted vegetables, a salad, but it tasted like the world had changed. They ate in silence at first, the kind of silence that feels comfortable, not heavy. Rachel laughed, her voice light, as she shared a story from her childhood. Sam smiled, a deep, genuine smile that had become rare in recent months. Ava found herself laughing too, as she listened to Rachel's animated retelling of a misadventure from their younger years. It wasn't just about the laughter, it was about the ease of it, the way it felt natural again. For the first time in what felt like ages, Ava felt a sense of peace settle over her, the kind of peace that didn't come from avoiding conflict or running away from her past. It came from facing it and still choosing to move forward. After dinner, Sam stood and walked to the window. He gazed out at the mountains in the distance, the dimming light casting long shadows across the landscape. The view was breathtaking, peaceful. Everything around him was still, calm. But as he looked out at the world beyond, his mind drifted, and for a brief moment, he felt the presence of his late wife, Janelle. She had always loved the view, loved the stillness of the mountains. It was where she found her own peace. Sam whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else, "I protected our girl." It wasn't just a statement. It was a promise fulfilled, a lifelong commitment to making sure Ava had the chance to live freely without the chains of the past weighing her down. He had done what he needed to do, but as Ava watched him from across the room, she knew that even with the weight of their past still lingering in the air, the future was unfolding in front of them. She was ready to step into it, to find her own way, surrounded by the people who truly cared for her. And yet, as she sat there, the lingering question still hung in the air. Would Colton fight for her again? Would he try to reclaim what he had lost, now that he understood the depth of his mistakes? Only time would tell, but Ava was no longer afraid to face it.